In this video, we're going to show you to install strut, boot, and bumpers on your Ford Explorer located inside your front struts. Using a 19mm socket, loosen and remove the lug nuts. Once you have the lug nuts removed, grab the wheel, remove it, and set it aside. Go ahead and use your 21mm socket, loosen the nut for your sway bar end link. Work that off to the side. Go ahead and throw that nut on there. And I'm going to go ahead and remove our ABS wire from the strut here. Just slide that out. Make sure you grab the rubber and not the wire itself. And go ahead and slide that out. And we're going to do the same on the back here. I'm going to use a trim tool and remove the ABS off of the strut itself. We're going to use a 15/16 socket to loosen and remove the nut on the strut here. Now when we go ahead and remove our strut bolts here from the knuckle is going to want to fall forward. We want to be careful of this here because we don't want to have abnormal pressure or weight on the hose here for the brake system. So I'm going to use a retaining strap here, go through the frame. I'm going to come around and I'm going to hook this onto the rotor. Going to tap our bolts. Use a 21mm socket to zip this bolt out. Now at this point here, the knuckle and the lower control arm and everything wants to drop down. We want to be careful of that axle itself that goes in the CV axle. We don't want that to droop too much. So we put another securing strap on this. I'm going to run this down and hook it onto our brake rotor as well. And that'll kind of support this unit in place. At this point, let's go back up on top and unbolt the top half of the strut. Underneath the hood here, you're going to locate 4 bolts right here for your strut tower. I'm going to use a 15mm socket. I want to go ahead and loosen these. I'm going to switch over to our gear wrench for the 2 outer ones here. We had to do that just because the strut tower bolt here was too tall. You can fit a deep socket on the front one here, but not on the back. Now you want to be careful when you undo these here, the last nut. The strut is now unbolted, so you want to be careful when that wants to drop out. Now at this point here, I have just a couple threads left. I'm gonna, with my left hand, loosen this nut and remove it. With the right hand, I'm gonna reach underneath the fender and grab that strut. At this point here, we have our strut set up in our strut compressor. And we're compressing this spring. Now before we go too far, we want to go ahead and mark the location of our spring in accordance to our upper mounting plate as well as the base. Now the position of the coil spring has two tails, one on the bottom where the spring ends, one on the top where the spring ends, and these are in particular locations. So we're going to use a yellow crayon here, and we're going to mark the strut tower, spring position on the upper bearing plate, and then we're going to come on the bottom here, and we're just going to mark the spring here as well as the strut base. So when we reinstall this here, we want to make sure that the spring is lined up in all these positions. Let's continue to compress the coil spring, taking the pressure off of the strut. You can see we have a little bit of free floating play, so we know that the spring is compressed enough. Using a 13/16 socket, we're going to go ahead and loosen and remove the nut. Now as that nut comes close to the top, the strut's going to want to drop out through the bottom. So just hold that lower bearing plate. Lower the strut down and out. Go ahead and slide the boot off. Inside is the bumper. Take your bumper, insert that into the strut boot itself. And go ahead and push this on to the strut. Ready for installation. Now at this point we have the strut fed up into it and we get the nut started. Let's go ahead and put a little bit of tension on there. I want to make sure that the mark that we put on the upper bearing plate lines up with the mark on the base, as well as the strut and the spring. Now with that nut bottomed out, we're going to release the pressure on our spring. We're also making sure that the tail of the spring on both upper and lower are at the stoppers on the rubber insulators, and they are. Now that that pressure is released, we go ahead and torque down that nut. I'm going to torque this down to 98 foot-pounds. Just going to use a pry bar. Secure this here. Feed our strut down into place. And once we get it in the general area here, we're going to feed this up into the engine compartment. Now I'm holding that strut up into place with the right hand. With the other hand, I'm just going to go ahead and get a couple of these nuts started here to support that strut. Do the same for these here. Just grab that strut and just kind of wiggle it around a little bit. ahead and torque these down to 41 foot-pounds. Now when you're doing this job here, you probably have your jack underneath the control arm supporting this area. Go ahead and jack it up or lower it down in order to get your knuckle to line up with the strut. In our case here, I'm just going to go ahead and lift up on this. Finagle one bolt in, and then I'll get the other bolt in and we'll tap those in. At this point here, we can remove our securing straps. Let's get the two nuts installed on the strut bolts. Good. Good, and torque these to 184 foot-pounds. Install the swivel end link. Tighten up the nut for the swivel end link. Torque this to 111 foot-pounds. Install the ABS harness here. Going to push on the rubber grommet, not the wires. Now at this point here, you want to go ahead and install the wheel. Once the wheel is installed, go down and have the alignment performed on this vehicle. That way you don't end up with premature tire wear or other component wear. Grab your wheel. Get that lined up and installed. We're going to get all of our lug nuts started by hand. Once we have these on, we'll go ahead and snug them down. Torque your lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.